Hello, thank you guys for tuning in. My name is Pastor Micah Beckwith. We've got an amazing opportunity for you to help catapult change in our great Hoosier state, the state of Indiana, when it comes to the legislative process. I have with me today two great friends of mine, two movers and shakers, Dr. Dan Stock and then Elijah Condalone. And we've got a coalition forming to help bring a change in the rules of the legislature to the General Assembly here in Indiana, to where we can get more things done and have a bigger voice to more people within the legislature. So a lot of times leadership kind of owns what happens in the legislature. So we elect good conservative, Republican-minded representatives. They go down to the State House, they can't get much done. And then we blame them, and then we kick them out of office and elect somebody else, and the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, and still nothing ever gets done. Well, why is that? A lot of that is because of the rules that are put in place to govern within the state legislative body. And we want to see a movement that will change those rules. So how do we do that? That's what this video is all about, and we hope you would join us in that. So I'm going to throw it to Elijah. Elijah, fill us in on kind of what is going on in this movement to help make the legislative process a lot more fair and even-handed for every voice that's down at the State House.
Yeah, thank you, Micah. And you know, Dr. Stock's going to be the best one to really dive into the details of answering that question specifically. I'll admit, and for those of you who don't know me, Elijah Condalone, I help lead Arise America and Noblesville United. We're very much focused on local Noblesville issues. We ran two really conservative candidates in the most recent school board election. We went 1 for 2. We were very pleased with that result, and we're looking forward to some positive change on the school board. But Dr. Stock and I, we met several months ago. Actually, we had you come out and talk at one of our events. And then recently, you contacted Allison Hanley, who's another one of our members of leadership at Arise America and Noblesville United, and you had sort of pitched her on this idea of how we could change the rules within the General Assembly to create transparency in our legislative process. And the other key word that really jumped out to me was accountability. I think most of you watching this, if not all of you watching this, would share the sentiment that it's really frustrating sometimes when good legislation, a good bill, goes into committee and dies. And then you don't have any idea how your representative even voted for that to kill the bill or to bring it into debate. We have no idea what happens behind closed doors, essentially, under the current rules. And I'll be honest, I was skeptical at first, but I got on a Zoom call with Dr. Stock and the other members of our leadership team, and I became a believer. So you've brought me from that skepticism to really being a believer in this proposal. And so it's really important that I wanted to get everybody to hear that same message. So that's really the purpose today. Is I just want to kick it over to you, Dr. Stock, and walk us through. By the way, there's a white paper that should be attached to the email that goes out with this video. Walk us through that and sort of just start at the beginning. What started this for you, and how do we arrive here today, and then where are we going next to really make this positive change?
So I actually started lobbying the legislature back at the end of 2015 on behalf of the Convention of States organization. And that lobbying effort got to see a whole lot of games that were played where there was either intentional or unintentional insincerity by legislators in both chambers. And most of it centered around, well, we're all hamstrung by these rules. When the Founding Fathers actually wrote constitutions and when legislatures came together, they were famed as a place where people went to debate an issue to come up to the compromise solution that served the majority of people who were there. It was actually the epitome of representative government. And unfortunately, these rules have now been used as a way to actually stifle debate and make sure that you can act like you're serving the public when in fact you're not really. And effectively what happens is when we elect a legislator, the power we give him, he walks right into the legislature and completely turns over to the leader of the chamber. And he turns it over by voting for the rules of that chamber that are selected at the beginning of every legislature. Unfortunately, some of those rules put so much hands in the power of the leadership that now bills can be controlled and destroyed or promoted when they're not supported and used as bargaining chips because he's so able to kill another bill that to get this bill he wants passed, he says, you don't get this, I'll kill this one if you don't support this one. And there's actually 3 rule changes that we're proposing that'll strip away the power of the leadership to stifle that debate and shift it toward the end of a few interests instead of the majority interest. The first way that this leadership controls power is by having control over who gets to be a committee chairman. So legislators want to be the committee chairman because if a bill is assigned to their committee, they get to say it's going to get a hearing, and that bill will get heard. So if they want to serve their individual constituents in their districts, they want to be the committee chairman. But because they are selected by and serve at the pleasure of the chamber leader, if they don't do what the chamber leader likes, he can remove them at any time. So it gives him power to say to them, I'm going to assign this bill to your committee, and I want you to never call it a hearing and kill it.
Before we go any further, could you, just for the people watching, can you give a couple of recent examples of when that exact situation transpired?
Yeah, I think it was for 2 straight legislatures, the constitutional carry bill actually never got debated, only because the committee chairman never would call it up for a hearing, despite the fact that it had great popular support and that many people at least wanted this question to be debated honestly and sincerely. It never even got a chance to hit the floor for a debate. Now, it's since been passed, but it took 2 legislatures to get that done because nobody had a way to force that into a debate.
And the reason the legislators don't want it to go to the floor is because at that point, then you, the people who voted for your representative, you'll know where they stand on the issue. They will have to put their money where their mouth is, essentially. And they don't want that to be the case because on something like constitutional carry, they know it's got popular support, but for whatever reason, the establishment, the leaders in charge, lobbyists, they don't want that. They don't want that bill passing. So they're now trying to cover their butts and make themselves look good to you while still doing the will of the lobbyist or the establishment or those who really don't have your interest in mind. They have their own self-interest in mind. And so you're proposing that this would be a way to actually make legislators basically debate on these really important subjects, and then you'll know one way or the other where your representative stands on the issues, which I think is the transparency that we all would want, both sides of the aisle.
As a matter of fact, right now what transpires is both parties will go into a caucus and decide what we're actually going to have a debate on and what we're not. And when they decide we're not going to debate this bill's not going to get a hearing, if you were to come out and then try and put that language in on a separate bill later on, then the President of the Senate or the Speaker of the House would pretty much recognize you as not following what you were supposed to do, even though it might be what your constituents wanted to do, and he could punish you by going to the committee chairman and saying none of his bills get called up for a hearing now, so he can't serve his constituents.
Now, on the caucus, just so people they understand this terminology, a caucus is a closed room meeting, closed door meeting. Nobody knows in the public what's going on. It's when the Republicans all get together, they caucus together, they talk about their strategy. It's this private meeting, and then they come out, hopefully from leadership's perspective, they want everyone to be unified. They don't want there to be any division whatsoever. They want the whole party to be unified, and if you ever break away from what was discussed in the caucus, you get, to your point, you get punished by leadership. And so just so people understand kind of that process, we want to make that clear for them.
And that's a great point. And also too, when we talk about establishment, you'll hear Micah say that, you'll hear Dr. Stock say it, you'll hear me say that. That's what we're talking about, is this establishment type of almost, I'll use the term, you guys may not agree with this, but I'll use it. It's almost like organized crime, right? Like you're part of the family. And if you deviate in any way, shape, or form from what the family says, then now all of a sudden you're outside of the family. And this is the kind of mindset that drives the kind of lack of transparency and accountability that we find in the rules today. Is that fair to say?
As a matter of fact, it also gives an even greater opportunity for a representative or senator to become even more misleading to his constituency about how he feels, because when they're up for a tough election and they want to look good to their constituency while doing something that the lobbyist really wants them to do, they will actually author a bill and then ask the leader to make sure that it gets killed. That way they can go to their constituents and say, see, I proposed this bill to try and help you out, knowing full well and good that it was never going to get passed. And in fact, the chambers work together, where if there's one chamber that's got a lot of problems, they'll pass a bill knowing the other chamber will kill them for it. So solutions that prevent that from happening is, first of all, to make it so the committee chairmen are actually chosen by the committee themselves and serve at the committee's pleasure.
That's good.
Now the committee chairman can't be threatened by removing his ability to get the bills he wants through unless he plays ball. He can still get his bills through and do what the committee wants, not what that one leader who can be so heavily influenced by lobbying wants. The other option that we want to do to change this is to make what's called a discharge petition. That's where a strong minority of either the committee or the chamber can file with the Secretary of the Senate or the House a petition to force a hearing on a given bill. So if the committee chairman does want to keep this bill from getting passed, we're proposing a 40% of members of the chamber or the committee sign the discharge petition. It forces a hearing on the bill. That's particularly helpful not only because if the chairman wants to be obstructionist, you can get around him, but it also makes it so then you want to come to your constituents and act like you were on their side when you really weren't. Say, well, that committee chairman killed my bill. We'll have a record of whether or not you started a discharge petition for your bill. And if you never started a discharge petition, or if he started one and you didn't go sign that discharge petition, then we'll know where you stood on that bill and we can hold you accountable for your failure to represent us. And then the third change that needs to happen is because of how they stifle debate at what's called second reading. So after something is heard in committee, it's passed out into second reading.
So committee that's the first reading.
That's the first reading is when we assign it to committee. Committee decides whether or not they're going to do some work on it. If they say, yeah, we're going to hear it, we're going to pass it out of committee. It then goes to the floor on second reading where anybody in the chamber can vote for an amendment to change that. But those amendments, when they're brought up, can be killed by what's called a procedural objection. So anyone on the floor of either the House or the Senate can say, well, I think that that's not germane to the bill at hand, or we have what's called a bill pending objection. Once that objection is made, then there's a debate between the Speaker hears both sides of this, and the Speaker of the House or the President pro tem right now rules on whether or not that is out of order or not, and his ruling kills all debate on the subject and any vote that would come after that debate was done. And in fact, right now, this is actually used when somebody who does break ranks and says, well, I'm going to propose this amendment anyway, gets his amendment so that no one has to vote on it and actually declare what their stance was on this by ending the debate. And that can be changed if we make the rule so that now, whenever somebody raises an objection to a particular amendment, it must immediately be decided by the entire chamber on record vote. Because now if you vote to kill that amendment and say we're not even going to discuss it, trying to avoid having to vote and show where you feel, we have you on record as having dodged that debate. And we anticipate that these will make these debates so they actually happen. And if they do happen and don't get decided the way the constituency wants, then at least we have a record of how that legislator failed his constituents.
So this is all an attempt to bring transparency to you, the voter. That's the whole goal. It actually gives minority a voice in the legislature. So right now we have a supermajority Republican in Indiana, which personally I'm thankful for. I believe the Republican Party is more in line with constitutional values than the Democrat Party is. But I also don't fear the other side coming to the debate floor. If truth is going to win the end of the day, it has to be given a fair and honest debate. And that's what we're hoping for. So we want the minority, we want the Democrats, we want those who maybe are the minority in the Republican caucus to bring the debate up for public debate. Because then we now, as the voter, we can say, well, that's the truth, we know the truth, and then we can decide whether or not our representatives fought for what we believe is true or not. So at the end of the day, this seems very common sense, very much like I think most people on both sides of the aisle would go along with this. If you ask them, on the street, do you propose that we do something like this? I think a majority of people would say, yeah, this sounds great. So what's going to be the pushback from this happening in the rules down at the State House? Where are we going to find the resistance? Because I have a feeling, since this hasn't been this way, there's somebody or somebody's trying to stop something like this from happening.
It's a great question.
Yeah, where do you think we're going to find that
I asked
resistance?
this exact question
Okay.
to Dr. Stock
Okay.
in a different way, but Dr. Stock, please, I want to hear your response to that.
So I think you're going to get different objections depending upon what the heart of the legislator is. many of the legislators continue with these rules because they've just never thought about the idea of changing them. But some of them don't want to change them because they really like being able to be duplicitous with their constituents.
So they can hide when
Right.
they want to hide.
Yeah, they hide when they get to hide when they want to hide.
You get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Oh, I support constitutional carry. Unfortunately, it died in committee.
Right.
Not my fault. I was there 100% of the time, right?
We saw this with the abortion bill that just came up this past. So many people, Republicans, for the last 30 years have been saying, oh, I am so staunchly pro-life. But it's not, I can't do anything about it because Washington, it's the Supreme Court, right? Well, then the Dobbs decision happened, and you saw a lot of those same Republicans that were so very staunchly pro-life over the last 30 years, all of a sudden, well, I'm pro-life, but my constituents really aren't as pro-life as I am, therefore I've got to go. And they started backpedaling, because they couldn't pass the buck anymore.
And in fact, one of the worst examples of that, they did have one senator who actually bucked the caucus
Senator
and brought
Mike Young, right? Yep.
brought up an amendment that the caucus had decided we weren't going to debate, and he brought it up anyway and had his chairmanship sacked by the president pro tem of the Senate.
So he did what he believed his constituents
wanted.
wanted him to do, and because of that, he lost his chairmanship.
That's correct.
Wow. That's like, to your point, that's, you do what the family bosses say or else you get kicked out of the family.
That's exactly right. I mean, and you can't, and look, God bless this individual for standing up for what he thought was right and for what he thought his constituents wanted, regardless of the consequences. That's critical. I mean, we have to have that type of strength in our legislators, that they're willing to do that. But they shouldn't be subjected to dismissal of their committee, of their position on a committee or their chairmanship, because they decided to go against what the leadership of the chamber wanted them to do. That's not how any of this is supposed to work.
Legislatures aren't supposed to dodge debates. They're supposed to have debates and settle debates.
Right back to the very beginning of what you said, which is our founders envisioned robust debate in our country.
Right.
It was considered honorable to debate. It would have been considered dishonorable to dodge debate, right? We have gotten so far away from what our founders intended for this country and their vision of what our legislators, state and federal, would look like. And here we are, and this is why, to bring it all back, this is why this kind of a rule change, this strategy is so important, so that we can force our legislators to not only provide transparency in the legislative process, but also accountability to how they're voting or not voting.
And I think there's a psychology of the legislature that people need to understand, because one of the other pushbacks that's going to come from legislators is, look, I'm frightened. If I actually buck the leader of the chamber, my bills will die and they won't get through. And sometimes it's hard for them to understand, unless they see enough support from the community, that look, we want you to dethrone the king. We don't want kingdoms anymore. We don't care who the king is, we just don't want kingdoms. Take that power back from him in our name and use it in our defense. If all of you vote to take his power, none of you have to fear what he can do to you anymore. Mm-hmm. And so there's a group of them who are going to resist this only on the, wow, if I put my name on this, if I do this, I'm going to be subject to abuse by the leader of the chamber. But they need to understand that, look, we've got your back on this, and we're going to remember that you actually supported this. Come election time, that we're going to say you were the guy who actually said, yeah, I'm going to change these rules and get rid of a kingdom. We're going to have debates.
Or conversely, the man or woman that said, no, I'm not going to vote for these changes for whatever silly reason that they can come up with, and they will, right? I mean, there is going to, so let's start talking some brass tacks here, right? So we've talked about sort of the genesis of this. We talked about how the founding fathers saw this and how far we've come from that. We've talked about examples of where these things have actually happened, where bills that the majority of Hoosiers support die in committee. We have no idea how our representatives vote. They come out of committee or caucus and tell us one thing. We have to take their word for it. Now here we are. We have the three changes you've proposed, and now we've got to take action. So how do we actually get this done? Talk to the people about the strategy of how we're actually going to get this done.
So I think what's probably most important is we have a coalition of groups, and they have the contact information that all of those groups have, or we can say, Mr. Legislature, this is the amount of support that is out there in the grassroots for your changing the rules of this chamber and taking that power that we gave you and holding on to it and using it in debate. And I think this is going to give the brave legislators that are almost there enough courage to say, hey, I think these guys will re-elect me even if I do this and the leadership doesn't like what I did, that they're going to still be with me and I'm still going to be able to be elected again. For those who actually want to get something done, they're going to say, yeah, I'm going to support this because this allows me to actually do the representation I want to do. There probably will be some legislators who become so uncomfortable with the inability to hide that they choose to get out of the legislature. But I think if we can present them with this is the number of groups, especially since it's so broadly interesting to all the different subject matters, on either side of the debate, whether it's gun rights, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's abortion, these are all things that benefit from an open and free debate. And so if they can see that, wow, this is broadly supported, and this is the number of emails and contact phone numbers that are becoming educated on this, they're going to find the courage to overcome what the lobbyists are concentrating on them and do this. One of the things that's making this survive right now is that none of you know this is how the sausage machine in the legislature grinds. But if they knew that you knew that that's how this worked, then they would, hey, well, you know what? I think I'm going to have the courage to strike out and do what the founding fathers intended this legislature to do.
You know, in Scripture, as a pastor, I always kind of look at what God's Word says and how we go back to just kind of the principles that we see in the Holy Scriptures. And there's this principle of the Lord says of Israel in the Old Testament, he says, my people are perishing for lack of knowledge. He doesn't say my people are perishing because they're bad people or that they're doing something wrong. He says they just don't know what they don't know. And I look at what's happening right now in our legislative process. 99% of the people in America have no idea how the sausage is made. And that's the problem. Why are things so bad in America? Because we don't know what we don't know. We are perishing for lack of knowledge. And so it's got to be our responsibility. We have to take it on our shoulders to learn the process, to understand the truth, and then speak the truth, but also be very strategic. And that's what I love about what Dr. Stock is doing here. He's very strategic in his thinking. How can we strategize to make sure that people become more aware, transparency wins the day, and truth rises to the top? But it has to happen in an open and honest debate. Right. So we need you guys to get your coalitions together to support this, to sign. Are you going to do a petition? How could they, if someone's watching this right now, say, okay, you've sold me. What do I got to do to move this down the field? What should they do right now?
So I would have them contact either the Convention of States or they can contact my office at drstock@purehealthmed.com. And what we need from them is the name of your organization, your contact person for that organization, and the number of emails or phone contacts you have on your list of people who follow and support that organization. Because what we're going to do is get this list of all the organizations and the number of contact people who support this so that we can go to these individual legislators and say, hey, this is the amount of grassroots support. It's no longer a naive population. Mm-hmm. They know how the sausage machine works. We don't want it to work that way anymore. And this is the support you will have if you choose to show that courage and say, we're going to have a legislator that does what legislatures are supposed to do.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, and if you're not in an organization, reach out to Elijah or me, and we'll get you plugged in. We'll add your name to one of our lists, and we can do that. And then you're just helping build that coalition even bigger. And you can tell your friends to say, hey, reach out to one of us here, and we can add your name to our list as well. So don't feel like if you're watching this and it's I'm not a part of a leading organization and that's doing grassroots activism. That's okay. You can still play a role in this, and we'll get you on that list. So we want to build a big list of names so we can go into the legislative body and say, hey, there's a lot of Hoosiers who support this type of transparency within our legislative process.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is what many of us who, and some of you watching this are leaders of various groups, and some of you are not, but the leaders of various groups, and this is what we've always wanted is to be able to coalesce the grassroots movement into some sort of action that's going to make a difference. And that's precisely what this provides, is an opportunity to really make a difference in again, how the sausage is made, right? If you weren't aware, you are now. And if you were aware and you were like me, like I pretty much knew how the sausage was made, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was just frustrated with the process, and the answer was, in my mind, was always, well, we just got to elect better people, and that's true. I mean, we've got to elect good, strong conservatives to the legislature, but this is a strategy that can actually impact change in this session if we can make it happen.
That's true. The rules can be changed at any time in the session, and it's neat because if the House votes to change the rules, the other chamber and the executive branch, the governor, can't stop it. If you're an organization that has tax-exempt status, because you're not actually supporting legislation, just a change in the rules, you actually haven't violated your tax-exempt status to support this. And I think it's important for us to understand we have a tendency to think of legislators as good or bad people, cowardly or brave, without recognizing what the system does to that individual who may have been one way when he got into it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's probably a lot of legislators, more now than I've ever seen, who want to be good legislators, but they're trapped in a system that takes good legislators and makes them mediocre, and takes mediocre legislators and makes them bad. And for their sake, for their comfort as well as our own, we need to say the game needs to change. And this will make mediocre legislators great. It'll make bad legislators either become mediocre or they'll decide to get out. If they can't handle the idea of representing my constituency, they'll say this isn't for me. And God bless them if they recognize that. I don't think we should demonize legislators. We have to understand what they're fighting in the face of and give them the strength and the power to fix this system, not just for ourselves, but for them too.
Yeah, it's very well said. And I think, you know, I think this is the opportunity to change the system, right? And so I love the way you put that. Is, you know, we're sending legislators into a system that is broken, and what we're trying to do now is give them the tools and the support to be able to change the system.
After all, it's our government, guys. We have to take responsibility if this government is behaving right.
Absolutely.
It's nice to go wag your finger at your legislator, but if you didn't force him to change and get to a better form of government, then we have the responsibility for not doing that.
All we can do is look in the mirror. If you don't like what you see in government, you have to look in the mirror, because it's ours. This is we the people. We are the sovereign in America, and we've got a duty to change it. So step up with us. We ask you to partner with us, get your groups involved. Let's change the rules. Let's make sure robust debate is happening in the state house at the legislative level. I mean, no one should fear that. If you fear that, you're probably afraid because you don't either know the truth or you don't know how to defend truth. And if that's the case, then you don't necessarily need to be in the legislative process. We need good people who know truth and know how to defend truth and let the debate happen. And at the end of the day, truth will win. And so let's make sure that transparency is there. And I don't know how any average American, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, I don't know how they would be against this.
When I do lectures on this topic around the state, the jaws of the people who see how this works just drop to the floor, and they immediately want this changed. And I tell you, you have to remember, the only person who doesn't want this is a tyrant.
That's right, yeah.
Only tyrants don't want debate and the majority rules serving the population. They're the only ones who wouldn't want this.
It's great. Amen. Well, step up, join with us, and let's see if we can get this done. We're going to put some information on the screen here, and you can reach out to any one of us, and we'll get you plugged in and get your organization plugged in. Thanks for listening. Let's go out and be the change.